Welcome to Talking Points. My name is Dr. Stephen E. Gardner, and I'm here with you today to continue in this brand new series. And this series, I believe, will serve us, especially those who practice the Christian faith and those who want to know the backstory behind what they believe. This particular series really focuses on the conflict that we have with our faith as American Christians. And we do have conflicts. We do have competing ideologies. We do have narratives that have guided us to think and believe and accept certain things. And as a consequence of some of these things, some of the things have been so normalized that we've accepted them as true. Just like sometimes we have ascribed things to God or to the Bible that the Bible never said and God never said. It just happened to be folklore or something that becomes situated in a person's culture and a person's belief system. In studying for this, I have confirmed a lot of things that I knew all along, but I'm like this. You get something good, you want to pass it on. And that's part of the reason why I'm chosen to focus on this particular topic on faith and conflict. And because of that, there are some things we need to examine and re-examine about what we believe, about the history and the transmission of the message and the location where the message was transmitted and then expanded to the rest of the world. Oftentimes when we look at the Bible or we hear the passage of scripture that Jesus said, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." When we think of all the world, we're looking at the globe as we understand it now. But really thinking about that passage, looking at the world in context, they're looking at the world that they knew or that they were familiar with then. They didn't know anything about America, at least it was not recorded. They didn't know anything about China, at least it wasn't very far. And there was no reference to Australia or other parts of the world except the immediate territory and geography that they were familiar with. And a lot of that geography is situated somewhere around North Africa and other parts of that. Parts of what they call the Middle East. That was a constructed term, by the way. Middle East is a constructed term. But wherever you find Jerusalem and those neighboring countries and so on and so forth, around that area was the, beginnings of not only the Christian faith, but also the faith of those who, of the Israelites. A lot of Israelite influence spilled over into that region roundabout. The world also included the world in which Rome was dominating and had influence. And so we're going to look at some of that. That's the world that they knew. And so when we think about going to all the world, we're thinking about the world we know. They were thinking about the world they knew. And so we're going to enter into the world they knew and find out just what were the origins of Christianity. And particularly in this particular segment, I am going to be talking about faith in conflict, the contributions and challenges of the African origins of Christianity. And this is part 2 in this segment. If you haven't seen part one, go back and watch it because it leads right into this. Today we're going to be talking about faith in conflict, the contributions and challenges of the African origins of Christianity. Here's a quote by the late Thomas C. Oden, who wrote the book, How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind, Rediscovering the African Seedbed of Western Christianity. And here's his quote: "Cut Africa out of the Bible and Christian memory, and you will have misplaced many pivotal scenes of salvation history. It is the story of the children of Abraham in Africa, Joseph in Africa, Moses in Africa, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus in Africa, and shortly thereafter, Mark and Purtuator and Athanasius and Augustine in Africa." Well, the last time we were together, we looked at a few realities among American Christians that believers and non-believers cannot deny. And that's the goal here. I'm not telling you what to think, but at least I'm putting some things out there for you to engage in your own, utilize your own critical thinking skills as it comes to your faith. We should always have an answer of those who ask us about our faith, but our answer should be an informed answer that should be premised somewhere in truth and a particular stance that's coming from a place of information that's valid. So the last time we were together, we looked at a few realities among American Christians that believers and non-believers cannot deny. Truths that melanized and non-melanized Christians may be uncomfortable with. One of those truths we will explore in this segment are the African origins of Christianity. Now, the acceptance of the African origins of Christianity in America can be influenced by a combination of historical, cultural, and social factors. This is an important point here. The acceptance of the African origins of Christianity in America can be influenced, and I'll say this, is influenced by a combination of historical, cultural, and social factors. So what I'm going to do in this first part, dealing with the challenges, we're going to look at some of the reasons that might contribute to the challenges in accepting this truth. What truth is that? The African origins of Christianity. Here are some of the challenges. Historical misrepresentation. For centuries, Afrocentric narratives dominated historical accounts, often downplaying or omitting the contributions of Africans to various aspects of human history, including religion. This misrepresentation has created a narrative that's difficult to change. Now, you know that the term colonizers is a term that's attributed to those European to those from Europe who engaged in colonizing aspects of the world that they knew. And part of their narrative that they included in their colonization was the version of truth or the version of reality that keeps them in a place that's above everyone else. And as a consequence of that, when it came to human history, especially of Africans, there's always been this Eurocentric narrative somewhere out there. And I'm not saying that all of information and knowledge that came out of Europe is premised in a bias. But there is a lot of information that's out there that would lead you to believe that Africans had nothing to do with the formation of the Christian faith and even human history. This misrepresentation has created a narrative that's difficult to change. Now, let me say this. Anytime we want to change something, it requires a process. The process by the person that's the change agent, who's patient enough to continue the effort no matter how long it takes. One of the other challenges that we have is the legacy of slavery. The era of transatlantic slavery left lasting scars on American society. Slavery often resulted in the erasure of African cultural heritage, including religious traditions. Now, as I said the last time, I don't want to go into a whole dialogue about slavery, but we want to deal with some facts. These facts will help us to understand that Africa and Africans have been misrepresented, not only in history, but also in the spiritual formation of the Christian faith. One of the tactics that the enslavers used is that when they were brought over from Africa, is that they divided the families. And they divided them to the point to where they made sure that they didn't speak the same language and so on and so forth. That was a way of what we have commonly termed as divide and conquer. If I can keep people separated from their culture, separated from their languages, even how evil this is, we're dealing with the facts. So, just try to bear with me here. We're dealing with facts. This is the history behind it. When you do this with the intent of keeping yourself up top and as a dominant one, those narratives often and many times erase the African cultural heritage. Now, this was not always the case, but for the most part, that's what we experience in this country, those who are African descent, for the last 400 years. Accepting the African origins of Christianity might challenge existing power dynamics and narratives that are associated with slavery. Religious identity. For many Americans, Christianity is deeply intertwined with their cultural and religious identity. Accepting the African origins of Christianity may challenge previously held beliefs and raise questions about the historical accuracy of certain religious narratives. Cultural bias. Cultural biases and stereotypes can influence how people perceive and accept information. And let me just take it a step further here. Cultural biases and stereotypes will influence how people perceive and accept information. Here's a quote from Thomas C. Bowden again. He says, "Some Westerners will turn away from even hearing of Africa's ancient Christian heritage because of the seated prejudices about the assumed unimportance of Africa to the world history." Let me say that again, and let's just sit with it for a moment. Some Westerners will turn away from even hearing of Africa's ancient Christian heritage because of the seated prejudices about the assumed unimportance of Africa to world history. The fact is, if I live in a bubble, and if my bubble is uninformed, and if my bubble you know, what's the word that I want to use? Keeps me separate from the contributions of the African culture or from any culture. I'm going to think and believe that my culture is the predominant one. That is the pride we have as Americans. Part of our pride is derived from the fact that we are what? We're considered a world power. And it's because we're considered a world power, there's a tendency to believe and feel that, okay, what we have is right and what everybody else is wrong. We are first class and they're second class. And so that type of pride has been prevalent in our world that we know as Americans. But as people of faith, there's a tendency that the spirit of the age or the culture that we're in, those things kind of bleed into our belief system. And we begin to form religious dogma around our cultural biases and around our prejudices. And what has been discovered from scholarly research is that a lot of things that have been told about Africa is based on an assumed unimportance of Africa to world history. A lot of things that have been discovered proves that Africa played a very major role in the formation of the Christian faith long before it went to Europe. Now, I want to invite you to approach the rest of this series with an open mind. And in approaching with the open mind, at the very end, I'm going to suggest a couple of books that will help you along this path to uncover the early African formation of the Christian faith and how they impacted the Christian mind. Here's another thing that we have come to learn about that gives some pushback. Resistance to change. Now, people often resist changing their beliefs, especially if those beliefs are deeply ingrained or have been held for a long time. Accepting new information can be challenging, particularly when it challenges one's worldview. There's certain people that just will not, you can tell them the sky is blue and the sky is blue. If they have come to believe that the sky is red, you cannot move people from that belief that the sky is red until you can get enough information that will help them to shift their view of the current hue. And so Jesus spoke of this in one of his parables. And I love Jesus, and I love the wisdom and how he engaged, culture, and how he engaged religious people of his day and religious leaders. But he made a statement in one of his parables that said, you can't put new wine in old bottles. And if you try to, what's going to happen that the bottles would break, because why? The fermentation would cause those wine skins to expand and they break. But he said that if you want to contain new wine, you've got to put it in brand new bottles. And so a lot of times before we can contain truth, there's something that must be updated in our current view of the present world we live in. But he also said something in that same parable. He says, no man having drunk old wine straightway desires new, because he says the old is better. Now, the key word that is mentioned in the King James is the word straightway. The word straightway means immediately. The parable basically suggests that immediately from the beginning, people are often hesitant about accepting any kind of new information or anything that challenges their belief. There's a possibility as time goes by that people will accept new information, and that's about how we grow as believers. We grow as believers by realizing that this is what I believe now. And as I mature in my faith and be part of that maturing has to do with my ability and my willingness to be a critical thinker when it comes to my faith and its origins. As we mature in our faith, we begin to shed biases, we begin to shed worldviews, we begin to shed perceptions that have been there all along, but no one's ever challenged it. And no one has ever put us on point to even investigate to see if these things are so. That's one of the problems and one of the challenges that we're faced is that if these things are so, let me examine them. Don't take my word for it. Go search it out for yourself. And so part of our Christian formation is about investigation, not about satisfaction or sitting on our laurels and just this is the way it's always been and I'm not upending anything that I've come to know. We have to be willing to mature. The Apostle Paul described his maturity in the statement that he makes there in one of the Corinthian epistles. He said, when I was a child, I spoke as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. Look, there's a lot of things that I believed and that I preached and that I taught 20 years ago or more, that now that I've matured in my faith, I've come to understand how uninformed or how limited the information that I had then. Does that mean that I was wrong? It means that I've grown. Understand that we're not always wrong, but we're always opposed to growth. Bad English, but I think you get my point. So, accepting new information can be challenging, particularly when it challenges one's worldview. Well, here's something else. Identity and heritage. The acceptance of the African origins of Christianity can raise questions about personal and collective identity. People may feel that this new information challenges their sense of heritage or belonging. Oh my goodness. If I've always believed that I'm right and then all of a sudden I find out that I am misinformed, or as Carter G. Woodson says, miseducated, look, I'm going to be challenged. And there's a lot of people that feel like their faith or their culture is predominant. And there's a lot of Eurocentric narratives out there that puts people in certain places above the other. How much will that place and their collective identity be challenged when they find out how much Africa contributed to the formation of their Christian worldview? I think a lot of people will be taken aback, but the first thing you're going to get is pushback. People generally will not accept new truth, no matter how true the new truth really is. Political and social factors. Discussions about history and cultural origins can become politically charged. Now look, we know this to be true. Even recently, we find some political and social factors that do not want the truth about slavery taught in their schools. In fact, there's a narrative that said that people of Africa, or those who were enslaved, really enjoyed their position that they were in. Come on now. Why would anyone in their right mind want to enjoy, the kind of inhumane atrocities? Tell the truth, no matter how much the truth really hurts. Accepting the African origins of Christianity might be seen as part of a larger discussions about race, privilege, and historical oppression. So that's just a true statement, and we don't have to go down that path, but we are aware of that even in our time frame in which we live now, how certain things are being sanitized about the involvement of slavery in America. Rather than tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God, we tell the truth that we want conveyed. We control the narratives. Whoever has the money really has the ability to control the narratives. And whoever has the power has the ability to keep that narrative in a position that what? Does not move them from the place that they're in, but keeps everybody at bay. Hey, that's an old adage. Rome did the same thing. And every culture has a tendency to do that, is that they try to keep the other group down. By doing so, we need to come up with our own narrative about that group and how we are in regards to them. It's important to note these three things: awareness, education, and open dialogue can play a crucial role in challenging misconceptions and promoting a more accurate understanding of history. Over time, efforts to uncover and acknowledge historical truth can contribute to a more inclusive and comprehensive view of the world's cultures and contributions. Well, I chose first to present the challenges so that we can have a definitive understanding of the factors that give pushback in our time. When we begin to talk about the contributions, the data from scholarly research is mind-boggling, affirming the African origins of Christianity, or should I say the early African origins of Christianity. One of the contributing scholars that I've drawn a substantial amount of material to present this lesson is the late Thomas C. Oden. He has authored many books and works concerning early African Christianity. Before his death, he founded what is known as the Center for Early African Christianity, based in New Haven, Connecticut. And there is the website right there. Check it out for yourself, see what they're all about, see how they go about gathering this data and the methods by which they disseminate it to the larger world, beginning right there in Africa. And so now we want to look at some contributions. And this lesson could probably go on for weeks to talk about all the contributions and all the things that I've come up with regarding the early African origins of the Christian faith. But there's a timeline, and I'm going to draw out some key points in the timeline. Some you're familiar with, others you didn't think about. Number one, the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. The Matthew tradition immediately reports the flight of the Holy Family to Egypt. Time out. Egypt is on the continent of Africa. Egypt is not separate from Africa. Although some would try to put Egypt in the constructed model as being part of the Middle East, the truth is, Egypt is on the continent and Egypt is in Africa. All right? So that's one of the earliest timelines we all accept. We know that the Holy Family, where'd they go? They went and hid out there in Egypt. Circa 30 through 33, Simon of Cyrene in Libya. Again, Simon of Cyrene that carried Jesus' cross in Jerusalem was from Libya. Libya is in Africa. Cyrene is in Libya. Pentecost, God-fearing Jews from Egypt and parts of Libya near Cyrene observed the Pentecost in Jerusalem, and they received the outpouring of the Spirit. Now stop and think about that. If there were God-fearing Jews in Egypt, which is in Africa, and there were God-fearing Jews in Libya, which is in Africa, and God-fearing Jews in Cyrene, which is in Africa, when they came to Pentecost to observe the Pentecost, the Pentecost feast, long before they came to observe the Pentecost feast, gives us this context that the people in Egypt and Libya were what? God-fearing Jews means what? That they were Torah observant before they became converted to Christianity. They were Torah observant Jews before they accepted the message of Jesus. That's the point. In circa 33 through 65, this period of the earliest tradition of transmission of Christian teaching to Africa, before the earliest gospel, which is Mark, was written. This is a period of the earliest oral tradition, notice the word oral tradition, of the transmission of Christian teaching to Africa, before the earliest gospel, which was Mark, that was written. In that time frame, eyewitnesses dispersing throughout Judea, Samaria, and Africa. Also, the conversion of the Ethiopian eunuch, treasure to Candace, the legendary queen of Ethiopia, as he returns to Africa, as it's reported in Luke. Now, or by Luke, rather. And you find that in the book of Acts, where he's sitting there reading something from the book of Isaiah, and Philip comes along and asked him, he asked Philip, who is this guy talking about? He's talking about himself, he's talking about another, and what? Philip preached about the person in the passage. And then he left and got baptized and went back to Africa. He was a Torah observant Jew. He was a God-fearing Jew, drawing his information and his faith from the Hebrew scriptures. And he wanted to know, who is this person talking about? And that became an opportunity for Philip to really preach Christ from the Old Testament. In fact, the truth is, the disciples in the early church all preached Christ from the Old Testament. Again, something we didn't think about. They preached Christ from the Old Testament because the New Testament was not written. And it was in this period that the first book was written. That was Mark. So that was the only gospel that was written in that period of time. All right? So now let's kind of run through some of these other important times. Around circa 43, we find Eusebius places Mark early in Alexandria in the 3rd year of Claudius. Eusebius, well-known historian, mentions Mark around this period of time that he was in Alexandria. Alexandria is in Africa. All right? 55 through 95, Mark was the first gospel written in the New Testament. The Gospel of Mark, written in Rome as a collection of Peter's eyewitnesses, viewed in Africa as setting forth the apostolic mission in Africa. Cyrenaica and Alexandria, they are on the continent of Africa. Mark, the cousin of Barnabas, we find that he's mentioned, and we're in Colossians 4:10, and let me just read that real quick. Colossians 4:10 says, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, greets you, as does Mark, the cousin of Barnabas, concerning whom you have received instructions. If he comes to you, welcome him. All right. We also find that this same Mark accompanies Barnabas to Antioch. Let's look at Acts 12 and 25. And it says, then after completing their mission, Barnabas and Saul returned to Jerusalem and brought with them John, whose surname was Mark. And lastly, back to Cyprus. So when we go to Acts 15:39, and we'll find the mention of Cyprus. And again, Cyprus is in Africa. This is what it says. Barnabas, it says, the disagreement became so sharp that they parted company. That is, Barnabas and Saul had a strong disagreement about John Mark. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. Cyprus is in Africa. So all these cities that are associated with Cyprus are all accessible to seafaring Jewish merchants from the ports of Africa, would include Bernice, Pelusium, Alexandria, and Carthage. Again, Carthage is in Africa. In circa 68, the martyrdom of Mark in Alexandria is celebrated around May the 8th. He dragged by a rope. Martyrdom probably connected with the Roman pogrom in Alexandria. Alexandria's in Africa, where the Roman persecution reported killing 50,000 Jews. Eusebius places Ananias as successor to Mark in Alexandria. 70 AD was the destruction of Jerusalem. Many Jews were sold into slavery by the Romans during this time frame. Others scattered to Egypt and Africa. Between 70 and 135 AD, increasing numbers of Jews arrived in Africa, especially Alexandria, Cyrene, Heliopolis, Berenice, Carthage, and Caesarea Maritima. All right, here's some other important contributions. As I wrap up this today, I'm going to mention briefly about 6 individuals that were African and contributed to the formation of the Christian faith. Number 1 is Tertullian, born in around 160. He was the first African to produce an extensive Latin literary corpus and wrote an apology called the Apologeticum. Tertullian was a North African theologian known for his contributions to the early Christian literature. He coined critical theological terms such as Trinity, and his writings shaped Christian theology and the development of doctrine. So if you want to know where Trinity came from, it came from an North African theologian named Tertullian. Origen, who's born around circa 185, was a prominent early Christian theologian and scholar from where? Alexandria. And he played a crucial role in shaping Christian thought through his biblical commentaries, apologetic works, and contributions to developing Christian doctrine. Cyprian, born around circa 200 in Carthage. Cyprian was a bishop of Carthage and a significant early Christian writer. He addresses issues related to church unity, the sacraments, and the role of bishops. His letters and treatises are essential sources for understanding the church of his time. Athanasius, born around circa 295, becomes bishop of where? Alexandria. That lasted from 328 to 373. Athanasius was a crucial figure in the early church known for defending Orthodox Christian doctrine against the Arian heresy. His writings, including on the Incarnation, are influential. Augustine was born 354. Augustine, born in North Africa, which is known where he was born. Augustine was born in modern day Algeria, which is where? On the African continent. He is one of the most influential theologians in Christian history. I'm going to say that one more time. Augustine is one of the most influential theologians in Christian history. His writings include, quote unquote, Confessions and quote unquote, City of God. And these have profoundly, not only those, but his works have profoundly impacted Western theology, philosophy, discussions on grace, free will, and original sin. Augustine is responsible for those things being impacted. Lastly, Didymus the Blind. Didymus the Blind, also known as Didymus the Blind of Alexandria, was a Christian theologian and scholar in the early church. One notable thing about Didymus was his contributions to theology, biblical commentary, a strong advocacy for education and intellectual engagement within Christianity. Well, this is a lot of information. Probably a lot of information for you to even process. But the truth is that learning the truth can be painstaking and can open a can of worms or challenge my current worldview. Jesus said this, you'll know the truth will make you free. When we're exposed to the truth, the question is whether or not I'm going to accept the truth that's been presented to me. Well, don't take my word for it, but this is the scholarship that's out there. And more recently, in recent days, it's not on one side of the road and it's not on the other side of the road. It is down the middle. And that's a task we have as scholars. As a scholar, I stand on the shoulders of other scholars. And we're responsible to make sure that we've tested the things that we put out there in front of you. But my challenge to you is to not take my word for it. Go the extra mile and find out for yourself. So here's a couple of books that I would recommend that you would learn more about the African origins of Christianity. This is the book that I have referred to throughout this series by Thomas C. Oden, How Africa Shaped the Christian Mind, Rediscovering the African Seabed of Western Christianity. Another book will follow up to it, is this one here, The African Memory of Mark, Reassessing the Early Church Tradition. And there are other works that are out there, and if you want to know some other works out there, some of them are on my shelf, but time would not permit me to go and disseminate or share all that I've learned. If you want to know more, you know how to get in touch with me. God bless you. I trust that Faith in Conflict has been informative, part 2. Come back as we will learn next time on part 3 and find out some other things that our faith in America is in conflict, especially conflict within the Christian faith, to be more specific. Talk to you next time. God bless.